everybody. Welcome to the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund Committee. I'd like to welcome members, officers and our advisor. Today, my name is Eric Kerry, Councillor Eric Kerry. I'm chairman of the meeting, and can I remind members that the meeting is being broadcast live. I also remind members to use their microphones when speaking and switch them off when you finish, please, so that they can be heard also on the broadcast. Before we begin the meeting, I'd like to remind those members of the public that we're not having any placards and banners, that they should remain seated, and that the members of the public may record proceedings of the meetings. Mobile phones and other electronic devices must be switched to silent, please. So we can now move on to item number 1, which is the minutes of the last meeting in your pack. May I ask the committee if the minutes from the last meeting can be approved, please, if you'd indicate so. Thank you very much. So item number 2 is apologies for absence. So Joe, can you please confirm any apologies and substitutions?
Thank you. This morning we've had an apology from Councillor Clark, who's being substituted by Councillor Allen, an apology from Councillor Tom Smith, who's being substituted by Councillor Barnfather. We've also received apologies from Yvonne Davidson and from Sue Reader.
Thank you, Joe. So welcome, Pauline and John. Nice to see you at the meeting. Item number 3 is declarations of interest by members and officers. So item A on that is, do any members or officers present have any disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? Please indicate. So I see none. B, do any members or officers present have any other interests, either pecuniary or non-pecuniary, to declare? Please. Again, I see none. Okay, so we can now move on to item number 4, the first substantive item, which is the DLUHC, Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, consultation on proposed reforms regarding the investments of the local government pension scheme. Before I hand over to Tamsin to introduce the report, can I move that the recommendation on page 8 of the agenda pack be moved? Can I have a seconder, please?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will second that, reserve my right to speak.
Thank you very much, Councillor Trona. Tamsin, would you like to take us through the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. The Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities has published a consultation relating to asset pooling, levelling up opportunities in private equity, investment consultancy services and the definition of investments. The Department's made policy proposals in 5 areas. On pooling, a deadline of 31st of March 2025 for funds to transition all listed assets to their pool and a move to fewer larger pools, each with assets in excess of 50 billion, to maximise benefits of scale. Levelling up, requiring that funds have a plan to invest up to 5% of assets to support levelling up in the UK. Private equity, an ambition to increase investment into high growth companies via unlisted equity. Investment consultants, regulations to implement the requirements set out in an order made by the Competition and Markets Authority in respect of the LGPS, and in the definition of investments, a technical change in the definition of the LGPS Investment Regulations 2016. Broadly, the motivation behind these proposals is shared and welcomed, but some of the specific suggestions need refining, defining and prioritising. Above all, the purpose of the LGPS is to secure pensions for its members at reasonable cost to employers, taxpayers and members, and no proposals should drive activity counter to this aim. Views of members are welcomed on these questions and any other matter relevant to the consultation. It is proposed to agree a response with the Chair of the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund Committee following further discussions here, with our independent advisor, colleagues at partner funds and with our pool. The response will then be submitted by the consultation deadline at 2nd of October 2023 and brought to the next committee meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tamsin. So pooling has worked in different ways in different areas. There are some that invest a lot, some that invest less. The whole point is that pooling is supposed to save money. It doesn't save Nottinghamshire a great deal of money because we had already had very good investment costs negotiated by our officers and staff previously. However, we have to, part of the pooling exercise, and this is a chance for us to feed back into the consultation what we think that direction should be and how, when it should be implemented. Interestingly, we actually were named in the online consultation. If you look at prior to question 7, do you agree with the proposed definition? Nottinghamshire was quoted about our solar farm investment, which is very, very interesting. However, pooling companies need to ensure that they produce products that we want them to produce that reflect our investment strategy and our asset allocation. It's a difficult job when you have several pension funds, 8 in our case, that have different strategies. So it is a difficult situation. However, government want to try and improve it, I guess. They want to make the savings, and they would like us to get our investments in a way that would help levelling up, which is why it's come from the DLUHC area, I guess. So the timing, however, has been unfortunate because we only received the consultation a few days or weeks ago, and the final date is before our next committee meeting. So in order for us to do that, the recommendation is that we get feedback from yourselves, work with the office to try and get a form of words that we can put through to reflect the committee's views on the consultation and get them in before the closing date. So that's really the situation, and I'd like to open it up to members for any questions or comments, please. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chairman. At first glance, this does sound like a good idea, but I would urge caution. As it stands, this fund can choose to invest to level up or not, and how much. Most importantly, which projects to spend, invest our money on for returns and mutual benefit. Being pushed rather than choosing to spend millions or billions into levelling up and illiquid private equity, this may be in conflict with the trustees and the pension committee's duty to secure the best returns for our pension fund members. With a smaller number of pools, no longer can we choose to level up our own local area. Levelling up could actually take place in places like the Royal Borough of Chelsea and Kensington, or other target seats of the government of the day prior to a general election. Stepping up investments in liquid private equity would need enhanced due diligence, as firms are not as highly regulated as listed companies and are harder to sell and value. I believe decisions are always best made local and as close to the people impacted as possible, Chairman. In an article published in the Financial Times dated the 12th of May 2023, entitled "Levelling Up Push May Hit Investment Returns," warns UK pension chief, I quote, and this is halfway through the article, I quote, "Investment returns are therefore very important to local government schemes," said Ian Campbell, Senior Investment Consultant with Hymans Robertson, a professional servicing firm. Every pound not earned from investments means a pound of contributions that may have to come from members or employers. For the council, this means less money to spend fixing potholes. Therefore, I would like to know if levelling up requiring that the pension fund must have a plan to invest 5% of assets to support levelling up in the UK, it doesn't seem clear to me. For example, can we only invest in government-backed levelling up projects? Who assesses the risk? Who assesses the potential returns of those investments? Who makes the choice of what to include or exclude from levelling up and private equity? really, where is the accountability? So, thank you, Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Waters. You make some valid comments in what you said. Can you please forward a copy of that to me as part of your response that I've requested to do? That would be most helpful. I understand what you're saying, and actually, I think the point of the consultation is to try and get feedback from everybody to see what they think about this. There's no prescribed answer to all those questions. They're open questions in the main in the consultation. Yes, there are indications that they'd like to see things happening, but that is again subject to consultation. So thank you very much for your comments. Are there any more? Councillor Barnford, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I speak as a guest to this committee today, but I was formerly a member of this committee, and you may recall that I was quite hostile to the original government advice, guidance, instruction that we pulled. We were a well-performing local government pension scheme in Nottinghamshire, well managed, cheap to run, providing good benefits to our members at that point in time. And effectively, the edict that we had at that point, I felt, was for us to bail out poorly performing funds, primarily the London boroughs. As I say, I'm a guest to this committee, so I'm not totally au fait with where our cost ratios are now, whether we're now paying more, whether we're paying less. Are we starting to see the benefits of that early stage of pooling? That's not information that I actually have. But, I just remind members, paragraph 4, and Tamsin alluded to it, and it's well worth repeating. Above all, the purpose of the local government pension scheme is to secure pensions for its members at reasonable cost to employers, taxpayers and members, and no proposals should drive activity counter to this aim. That to me is our, if you like, first of the 10 commandments. It's our overarching reason for our existence. Anything that potentially detracts from that, I am hostile to and non-supportive of. I listened to some of the points that were raised by Councillor Waters there, and I have to say I agree with many of them. I'm always concerned when our influence is diluted. When we talk about further reducing the number of pools, I'm not quite sure what that entails. We were already forced into a pool. Are we now talking about having an even smaller number of pools covering an even greater area with an even greater fingers in the pie, as it were, which means that our vote will always count for less in future in terms of our members in the Nottinghamshire scheme. There's a raft there, obviously, of individual questions. I personally don't have the knowledge to be able to answer those in detail. I leave that to professional officers and yourself, Chair, and regular members of this committee. But it concerns me that any decision that we make here potentially has an impact on the welfare, benefits, livelihood, standard of living, quality of life of a huge number of former Nottinghamshire employees. We need to be very, very careful in how we respond to this consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Bourne, for the very well made statement there. Thank you very much for that. Anybody else, please? Mr. King, Chris.
Thanks, Chair. When this all came about in the early stages, we were given a brief that there were going to be substantial cost savings. I do not see those cost savings coming through yet. And all I can see is we're being cajoled to agreeing to something that is not saving us money to be brought into effect maybe by March 25. I would like to see some resistance to that until we actually get to a stage where we do see cost benefits. Then maybe I would change my view. But at the moment, my view is I do not like to go ahead with this. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, just a comment, Chris. If you want to format some responses to the questions rather than an overall view of that would be helpful. Thank you. Councillor Chapman, Graham.
First of all, I think what needs to be clarified. First of all, I think what needs to be clarified is the legality of
this, right? And there does seem to be some doubt over it. And if it's not legal, then it's not going to be a go unless somebody changes the legislation. Right. Second, I'm actually quite sympathetic to this, and here I am defending the government, right, against conservatives in this room. But I think it's 5%, right? We're not talking about 50%, right? 5% is actually quite a reasonable amount. There's been underinvestment from the City of London in our own country for a long, long time, and it's about time we tried to reverse that. You shouldn't have to be going to the Chinese for capital, right, and for investment, right? So something's got to be done, and this is, I think, quite a sensible small step in the right direction. The problem then comes with what do you mean by levelling up, and what do you mean by high growth companies, and that's where it all gets fuzzy. And if anybody said to me, right, let's invest in high growth companies, the chances are what you would do is you'd invest in the golden triangle between London, Cambridge and Oxford. That will produce the opposite of levelling up. It will suck more energy into that triangle. So there is a contradiction in what is being requested. Right? So are they asking us generally to invest in British industry and British entrepreneurship, or are they looking to level up? Right? My view is that we should in theory be doing both. I'm far more interested in the levelling up bit. So therefore, they need to talk about localising any investment, right? And it needs to be targeted locally. Otherwise, all we'll be doing is investing in Cambridge and Oxford. I mean, because that's where the growth is, and that's what we've got to reverse. My final point is absolutely agree with the last speaker. I would love to see some performance statistics about how the pool's doing, right, so far, because I'm not totally convinced that it's been a good move and that we are getting improved value for money. But it'd be nice to know that in some statistical terms, in order to be able to support our argument.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chapman. So if you want to give us a little more depth or in writing about those responses, that would really help. And in terms of LGPS Central, will we get regular reports, quarterly reports about the performance? We meet with them, and in fact, we can talk about that in the investment return side of it later on in today's meeting to help you understand where we are in those different investments we currently have with them, from the sustainable investments, etc. So we can talk about that later in today's meeting. Pauline, sorry, Sheila. Sorry, can you put your microphone on, please?
Have I pressed right one? I said, have we had any information on any levelling up we've had in areas that we represent? Because we've all got areas where things are closing down, and just a question.
Okay, so we can try and get you some feedback on that, because our investments cover a wide range of it. So we visited some yesterday. We visited some investments we have in the local area that built warehouses built sheds for business.
I'm thinking of such as Wilkinson's, and
Yeah. Okay, we'll try and get some more for that. Thank you. Tamsin, can you add anything to the levelling up side, please?
It is a piece of analysis I would love to do, because I think it would be really interesting to see how much of our investment is in certainly Nottinghamshire. I think trying to get down to individual wards would be a challenge. There are issues with that, quite apart from the time requirement, which is the reason why I've not made a start on it yet. And that around defining what counts as local businesses, because there are quite a few businesses with a substantial presence in Nottinghamshire that may well have a London registered office. So do you include those? Would you include a Nottinghamshire registered office where most of their business takes place elsewhere? So whatever I bring, there's going to be quite a lot of caveats to it. But I think it would be quite an interesting piece of analysis, and Central have offered help with that analysis, where for the listed investments that we hold, because you can automate some of that. For our private investments, I know we have got, in fact, it was mentioned by Central, some of one of the investments in their infrastructure fund is in Nottinghamshire. But actually going down to that granularity will take a lot of work, because we'll need to write to the investment managers to get that detail back. So it is a piece of work we would like to do, and I'm sure everybody would be interested in it, but I'm afraid I can't guarantee when I'll have time to do it.
Okay, just to add to that, I think part of the consultation looks to ask for information, regular information about how much of the fund is in levelling up and how complex that is. I think we need to feed back into the consultation about that. Is that?
Yes, that's already on my draft list of
right
of comments. However, insofar as it's defined, that levelling up within the consultation is not necessarily local. It could be levelling up any area across the UK.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Tamsin. So, Councillor Introna, you're next on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that I do have concerns here is with regard to the autonomy of the pension fund to make decisions. As has been said by a number of colleagues around the room, our principal responsibility is to protect members' investments. And I think we also need to remember that when we're discussing all aspects of our investment strategies. Whilst pooling may generate some savings due to scale, and I understand the benefits of that, we need to always consider what is the net performance, because saving due to scale is one thing, but net performance is the critical thing that matters, because we need to make sure we're generating investment returns for our members. In terms of levelling up, one comment that's often made in this chamber is, and at this committee, is comments relating to our pensions investments and investing locally. And for those of us that did attend yesterday's visit with Aberdeen, we saw some potential there, particularly in the high street in Nottingham, where investment in some of the retail outlets, but by building in residential capacity above or around, or just by reusing buildings and facilities for mixed residential use, could potentially open up those areas to self-regeneration due to more people around, and opening up the sort of evening culture that we get, that often drives more retail to develop. So I think we see that there are some opportunities there. So I wouldn't rule out being able to use it for levelling up support, but it needs to not, in my opinion, be our primary focus. We need to maintain a degree of autonomy. We need to make sure that we're doing what's right for our pension members, and we need to be doing what's right for the local area too. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Introna. Councillor Puru-Horan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with much of the comments that have been mentioned, but if I may, I think from a sort of a macro national economic point of view, we've been kind of bumping along the surface of 0+ since 2008 or so. You know, growth is an issue, productivity is an issue, and I think that the whole of the pension fund industry has got a role to play in basically escaping from that sort of disappointing economic performance in the future. And so I think this is probably the start of a debate to show some leadership in investment in this country, certainly. And I think we have a role to play. So whilst I absolutely accept that our number one priority is for our members and pensioners, absolutely, I would not wish our responses to be sort of akin to these images I see of, you know, Mel Gibson coming down from Scotland to sack the city of York, and then you pull up the drawbridge and all of that. I think the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund is well run enough to be ambitious and to welcome this debate and to contribute positively towards it.
Okay, thank you very much.
We don't tie ourselves in.
Yeah, sure. And again, if you want, if the groups want to work together to send a response in for each of the questions, that would be most helpful. Councillor Jackson, Roger.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. To be fair, most of what I was going to say has already been said by members, and to me, this is like a bit of a balancing act, isn't it, between the best return we can get for the pension, but also the chance to invest to improve the local economy. It's getting that balance right with what we're doing, with the investments we've got. I mean, the pooling does give, I've been involved in pooling in certain things, a good economy of scale and savings, and a chance to invest larger sums into projects to get better returns. But it's whether how much control you have over that going forward. But I do agree with what Mr. Chairman said, that the chance of investing in the local economy or to improve the local economy, from our pension fund is a good idea. But it's what returns are like, isn't it, in compared with the wider market.
Okay, thank you, Roger. I think the comment from Councillor Trona about it's about net returns, so it's about investment performance and cost together as net returns for the fund. Okay, William, Mr. Moore.
Thought it might be helpful just to give a sense of what other funds are kind of giving responses to. There's a lot of pushback on the date of March 25, and I think the key point here is that the government is suggesting that we should commit to all our money to pools and then they're going to be consolidated, and that is the wrong way round. That's cart before the horse. Also, in terms of the proposal to force us to put money into particular areas, I actually agree with Graham. I think it's against pension fund law or they're seeking to ask you to do things against it. But there are lots of reasons which people have said in this room why that is not a good idea. Private equity, higher cost. The government's trying to reduce costs. They are looking at past performance. We all know that looking at past performance to predict future performance is not a good thing to do. We are, like most of the LTPS funds, we are a well-funded scheme. We should not be taking more risk. We should be taking less risk. There are lots of reasons why, the actual details here have got flaws in them. But that said, and as Tamsin said at the beginning, the direction of travel is pretty clear. The government wishes us to put more money into the pools, and they wish pools to succeed. And I'm afraid we cannot ignore that.
Okay, thank you for that pragmatic response. We'll obviously consider that. Are there any other more questions or comments, please? Okay, so the recommendation was moved and seconded. So all those in favour, please. Are there any against? Any abstentions? One abstention. Thank you very much, Councillor Waters. Okay, thank you. So we'll now move on to item number 5, which is the PLSA Local Authority Conference 2023. Before I hand over to Nigel to introduce the report, I'd like to move the recommendation on page 18.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to second that.
Thank you very much. Nigel.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to keep this very brief because hopefully colleagues have had a chance to read what I hope is a very comprehensive report. Almost felt like you were there, I'm sure. The conference was in June. It's a very good conference. I would recommend colleagues to think about attending those in future. It covered all the relevant and topical conversations that have been taking place, and I know it's been overtaken slightly into one of those topics, which is about the Mansion House speech, which then led to the launch of the consultation, which is the item we've just been talking about earlier. It was attended by myself and Chris King, and I don't know whether Chris really wants to add anything to it. I wasn't going to dwell too much in terms of the separate UK politics inside scoop because that's a personal view, not mine in terms of that one. So thank you, colleagues.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Chris, do you want to comment?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Nigel. It's a very, very good conference. Very interesting in the sense of what you can learn, and also with the meeting of the various other pension funds and hearing them where they're going and how they're moving along. It was a great way of getting to know other people, other funds, and I'd highly recommend any members to attend. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Chris, and thank you for attending. Yeah, I would like to say that we do have a number of conferences again coming up in the future. If any members would like to go, please let us know ASAP so we can fill those places. Thank you very much for that. So the recommendation. Any other questions or comments from any members about? Yes.
Yeah, I thought it was a very interesting report.
Yeah.
Thanks. I like the fact you chunked it up, so it's quite interesting reading. But I'm a bit of a sad character. What the one thing that did strike me was to do with currency risk, and I just wonder the degree. I can't recall us spending an enormous amount of energy here at any point since I've been a member on currency risk. Now the chances are that we haven't got a lot of currency risk because the pound keeps going down, and therefore your foreign earnings are going up. But I'm just wondering whether whether I've missed it or whether we are doing that. And we don't need to worry about it, or whether we do need to do something about it.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Tamsin, do you want to come back and answer that about that exposure or not?
Yes, I mean you're absolutely right that there is the potential for currency risk. Some of our investments, the currency risk is hedged. Most of them, including all of our main mandates, the currency risk is not hedged. The view the pension fund has taken is that there is a cost to hedging currency risk, and that over the long term, which of course the pension fund invests over the very long term, the ups and downs in the currency markets will probably broadly not have a massive effect on returns.
Do you want a quick come back on that, Graham?
Well, that's our policy. It sounds quite sensible. Is it written down? Because I say we are churning millions and millions and millions, and I just think if that is our policy, right, we're responsible for setting policy. It sounds like a sensible policy, so it'd be quite useful to have a couple of paragraphs saying this is where we are.
Investment.
Yeah, I think it must be in the investment strategy in terms of set out, Graham. But I wonder if it's something for us to think about in terms of a future topic to be covered by members in terms of getting a deeper dive in terms of about the currency risk. I think it's a really good point, Graham.
So we have the working group in January where we're going to consider our revised strategy, etc., and we can just have a look at it and try and improve the comms and communications of what that policy is, so that will keep members more advised. If that's the right way to do it, William, is that? Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so if there are no further comments or questions, the recommendations have been moved. All those in favour, please. Thank you. Any abstentions or against? No, I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 6, it's now for us to receive the independent advisors report for the committee. So I'll hand over to William after I've made the move of the recommendations set out in the report. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Second that.
Thank you. William, would you like to give us your report, please?
Right. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to turn straight to kind of the end of my report, paragraph 9, where I comment that the outlook is looking relatively benign at the moment. And I don't wish to sound like Michael Fish, but we've got a situation where we've avoided, I think, recession. We have got inflation coming down to 2-3% in most countries of the world, which is exactly where equities in particular like it. And interest rates, they may go up a little bit more, but they're almost certainly very close to their peak. So it's not a bad outlook going forward. Of course, there are some things to think about and worry about. I think one is growth. As was mentioned earlier on today, growth is very low through the world, and it's hard to see what's going to where you're going to get growth from. And my very quick comments would be that growth is going to come from areas like tech, which has actually been the main driver of equity markets this year. It's going to come from healthcare for obvious reasons, and probably from emerging markets simply because they got more consumption to do over the next 5-10 years. I think I worry about deflation, which may sound a slightly strange thing to say, but there's a risk that central banks tighten further and tighten too much, and China in particular, which is important because that's where where goods are made nowadays, actually is almost in deflation at the moment. So that's a worry to think about. And then obviously, well, the third thing to worry about is higher bond yields. They've gone up to 4.5%. I think they're going to go up another 1 to 1.5% from here, and that has an impact on valuations of a lot of assets like infrastructure. So it's not what I'm saying. The economic environment looks quite benign for markets. There are things to worry about. I actually think this committee should be looking more on the liability side than the asset side, because one of the things that higher bond yields does do, it gives you more scope to try and match future outgoing payments, pension payments in the future. I think we shall discuss this in the working party. I actually, heads up, don't think now is the right time to do that, but the time will come. And then secondly, although I'm worrying about deflation in the very short term, in the long term, inflation has still to be the major risk. Government debt to GDP in the UK and the US is around 100% of GDP. That is much higher than it's been throughout much of all our lifetimes. US debt will probably go up to something like 200% in the next 20 years. And that has to be worrying. So that ultimately, I think, has to lead to inflation. So the second kind of big thing to think about on the liability side is how to mitigate inflation risk. And again, we'll be coming back to that in the working party. I'll stop there and open up for questions.
Thank you, William. Do any members have any questions about William's report? Okay, just one of the items in it, William, I think there's a paragraph where you mentioned that you think that UK equities are relatively cheap, but there's a risk to that. So will that be part of our discussions again going forward?
Sadly, UK assets have a risk premium because of what's happened over the past. It's not just the past 1 year, but the past kind of few years. Yeah. I think another issue with UK equities is it goes back to this: where you're going to get growth from tends to be areas where the UK is not, at least in the listed markets, very strong. So I suspect that UK equities are going to remain rather cheaper. And one of the issues there again for the working party is we reduced the UK weighting a few years ago. Should we consider doing it again? And I don't have a straight answer on that, but it's certainly something to think about.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Waters-Lee.
Thank you, Chair. William, I'm interested in your thoughts to do with the infrastructure investments, because infrastructure, bizarrely, it was meant to be a hedge to inflation, but it's almost acted as a bond proxy, and a lot of the prices have fallen as interest rates have risen. Do you see that coming back and doing what we had originally intended it to do?
I think that goes right to the nub of the whole problem of how we mitigate inflation in the future. Go back a year and a half, infrastructure was yielding something like 5-6% plus inflation. Indexing gilts were yielding minus 3% plus inflation. So there was a 9% differential. Today, that differential is down to about 4%. And that's why I think there is a good argument for starting to move money into indexing gilts. The question is the timing. And again, I'm not absolutely convinced that now is the right time to start, but it's definitely quite close to it. Looking forward, I think infrastructure assets, because they are long duration, you'll probably continue to see net asset values fall. But remember that, again, our liabilities, certainly if you discount them back to the present day, will also fall if bond yields rise. So because they're a kind of match for the liabilities, even if it's only a fairly approximate match, it's not necessarily a bad thing if the valuations have fallen, because the liabilities will have fallen roughly together. Does that help?
Thank you for that, and that's a good question. And the important thing there is that we are, I'm not sure the exact number now, but around 100% funded, and it's when you're above 100% that's when you start making the decision to move to liability matched investments.
It's back to the question of how and when and whether we should de-risk.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions or comments, please? Okay, all the recommendations been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please to note it. Thank you. That is unanimous. Okay, item number 7, members, is the work programme. So the recommendation is on page 24 of the agenda pack. So I'll move that.
Second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mike. And please, Tamsin, would you take us through the report?
Thank you, Chair. In the appendix, you can see the work programme for the rest of the committee meetings of the current cycle. The committee is asked to identify any additional reports required. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Tamsin. Comprehensive report there. Are there any questions or comments from members, please? Okay, I see we're actually on time at 11:10 according to the agenda timings we had, so that's very, very good. I don't see any questions or comments. The recommendation. Oh, sorry, Graham. Yes, we are. Yeah. Oh, okay. Very, very proactive of you, Councillor Chapman. Microphone, Mike. Councillor Chapman, please.
And one of the things I'm going to keep nagging about is the constitutional arrangements and our capacity to vote, right? And I'm just wondering when that's going to turn up on the work programme.
It's on there to be placed. I have spoken to the monitoring officer, and there's nothing changed in terms of consultation and government stuff yet. So it's still on the agenda, but we haven't got round to defining it because we're still.
Okay. Well, it just sounds a bit like sitting on the fence,
okay,
and throwing stuff into the long grass.
Okay. Well, it's not. But if you like, we can send you a letter to inform you of progress or whatever's.
If you do that, that'd be great.
Thank you
very much. I just want to let you know I'm going to keep nagging.
Sure.
All right. I shall bore you into. All right.
You don't bore me, Councillor Chapman, at all. It's a valid question. Chris King.
Thank you. Could you just clarify on the December meeting, the report that's due to be given by Marge Toward on good governance? Is that likely to actually include what Graham's just been discussing with you? Thank you.
I'm not sure, Nigel.
I think it hopefully will cover that, Chris, but it might be worth making sure that Marge is able to clarify that. But it also, in terms of responding, because I think we're hoping that there may be some consultation out on the good governance, which is a bit wider than just about that particular aspect that you're trying to cover. So,
we believe it involves things like training for members, all that kind of stuff as well, which is different between the SAB and the committees, etc. So, William, do you want to comment on that? Yeah?
Just as a bit of background for the committee on that, about 5 years ago, the government commissioned Hymans to produce a good governance report, which is, with one exception, really quite well received by almost everybody, but they still haven't put it into law or had a consultation on it. And that's, I think, what has been referred to here.
Yeah. Thank you, William, for that clarification. Very good. Any other questions or comments, please? Yes, Chris.
Yeah, just one thing that came up at conference when we were down at the water park was from the pensions minister was a statement, even though it's a very bad video, that no further dealings with pensions or no new introductions were going to be made before the next election. So I'm just a little bit worried that none of this seems to be going forward at all, and we're not going to be getting anywhere.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll have a look at that feedback. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Waters, Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. The last couple of meetings I've brought out about the potential of looking at disinvestment from tobacco companies. Is that underneath any of these headings at all?
Again, my belief of that is that we'll talk about that at the January working group as part of that whole discussion. Does that meet with what we believe we're doing then?
Certainly, our exposure to tobacco investments is monitored on an ongoing basis, and I can include an update in that January, in the January strategic asset allocation review.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Alongside it.
Is that okay, Councillor Waters? Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments, please? I don't see any, so we've moved the recommendation for the work programme. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? I've not seen any hand raised. Is that an abstention, Councillor? Is that an abstention or a? Which is that? Is that in favour? So that's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we now move on to item number 8, which is fund valuation performance. The recommendation is on page 36, so I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll second that. Reserve my right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Introna. Tamsin, can you introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report is to inform the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund Committee of the value of the pension fund at the end of the last quarter and provide information on the performance of the fund. The table in paragraph 3 shows the valuation at the end of June, at the end of March, and the value a year ago. The fund investments have increased by 28.7 million, which is 0.4% since the previous quarter. Within this valuation is 507 million of infrastructure investments. Infrastructure investments are now 7.8% of the fund, with 9.7% of the fund committed to infrastructure. Paragraph 6 shows a more detailed analysis of valuations by portfolio, and paragraph 8 shows the first quarter fund account and unaudited comparative figures for last year. Paragraphs 9 to 20 relate to the fund's holdings in fossil fuel companies and to investments in sustainable equities and renewable energy. There are a number of caveats that need to be understood in interpreting this disclosure, which are explained in the report, and I refer members to these. Over time, it's anticipated that fossil fuels will decrease as a proportion of the fund and that the investment in sustainable equity and renewable energy will increase, but this long-term trend will not be smooth. At the end of June, we had an estimated investment of 190 million in fossil fuel companies, which is a little under 3% of the fund, and sustainable and renewable energy investments amounting to 811 million, which is 12.5% of the fund. Members are reminded that a more thorough assessment of our exposure to fossil fuels through our equity investments is provided by LGPS Central's carbon risk analysis. The core index portfolio section reflects the equity market movements over the last quarter. The Schroders portfolio shows the regional analysis of holdings and purchases and sales during the period. And the LGPS Central portfolio shows our investments made through the pool. Aberdeen have continued to manage our property portfolio. The specialist portfolio section shows the composition and valuation of the specialist portfolio and the transactions during the quarter. As agreed at the March committee meeting, the Dorchester Credit Secondaries Fund 5 was recategorised as a credit investment at the beginning of the quarter. The section on responsible investment activity summarises some of the responsible investment activity which has taken place during the quarter on behalf of the fund. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tamsin. Very comprehensive report. Not much movement in total asset values, a few little things happening in there. So, open up to any questions or comments. Councillor Waters, Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. As it's been very topical in the news of late, could we ask the managers of infrastructure and property to conduct a formal review to undertake if air-related concrete has been used in those direct holdings, and as such, is there an impairment in the property values and what's been done to repair, and is the insurance etc. in place for that? Thank you, Chairman.
I know such review is already ongoing by Aberdeen, which is our directly held investments. I will make wider inquiries relating to our indirect property investments that aren't through Aberdeen and our infrastructure investments.
Okay, thank you, Tamsin. Any other questions or comments from members at this stage? Obviously, we have the excluded item coming up shortly, so I'll take that as a no. We have moved the recommendation, seconded it. All those in favour, please. Any against or abstentions? And one abstention. Thank you, Councillor Waters. Okay, we move on to item number 9, which is exclusion of the public and the closure of the online meeting. We now move to the part of the agenda that proposes that we meet in closed session to consider the exempt information on agenda items 10 and 11. I therefore invite the committee to resolve that the public be excluded for the remainder of the meeting on the grounds that the discussions are likely to involve the disclosure of exempt information as described in Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. I'll move that and ask for a seconder, please.
Second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I'll take that to a show of hands, please. All those for? I think that's unanimous. Thank you. We will now wait for the public to leave the chamber. Thank you.